really thrilled. Again, I'm Ryan Cooper, the co-chair of the Docent Advisory Committee, here to bring glad tidings of comfort and joy from that group. And today we have a special thing. We're all very appreciative of our guard staff here at the Federation Building in all they do. So we would like to collect, for those of you who are interested in contributing, for a small little token of appreciation to our guard staff. So we'll pass the proverbial basket, in this case a wonderful Holocaust Museum and Learning Center envelope. So if you would like to contribute, feel free. If not, hey, that's cool too. So I'll start over here, we'll have it go to the back, and then it will eventually end up to me here in the second row aisle. And now, you know him, you love him, Stan Rich.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the meeting. Security does a lot for us. You know, they help greet the tours. They keep them in order until you come up from down here. So
I think Barb.
This is a nice idea to recognize.
I think Barb just put her stuff down right there.
It's winter, so when you sign up for tours, do note which school group you're going to give a tour for. So if it's a snow day, you'll be able to see whether they're closed for the snow day. Okay, so pay attention when you sign up for tours. Lori has put the new calendar out, the January calendar. Things are a little slow this season. You know that as the months go on, they get busier and busier and busier. For now, is this for docents also, Lori, or for speakers?
Docents and speakers.
Docents and speakers. On the January calendar, please sign up for one tour for the new month. Everyone's really eager to give tours. We really want to make sure as many people can give tours as possible. So docents and speakers, just sign up for one until next week. Then drop in, and if any slots are still open, you're welcome to grab them. Correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Again, the idea is really to allow as many people as possible to give tours and for the speakers to speak to the different groups. Is Lois here? Lois Rubin is here. Lois, in addition to being a docent here, is also a docent at the St. Louis Art Museum. Lois has offered to conduct a tour of their special exhibition, which is about graphic arts from the second half of the 20th century? 60s and 70s. 60s and 70s. I've seen it. It's an excellent show. When is that tour going to be?
Thursday, January the 17th, or at 1 o'clock.
Thursday, January 17th at 1 o'clock. Should they come find you?
Find me here.
Here.
After this meeting.
It's a very good show. It's an excellent docent. So sign up. It's a great opportunity. And talk to Lois today, so she can arrange with the Art Museum to reserve tickets and spaces for you. I'm going to send you something out in by email, but I admit for the last 18 years, 19 years, that means I think 9 docent classes since I've been here, I've been teaching something incorrectly. On the image of the wall about the United States, there's an image many of us use of a German Bund group of children giving the Hitler salute. And when you look closely, you can see that there are American flags behind them, a very powerful image that I've been saying is from St. Louis. It is from New Jersey. It's from New Jersey.
Close enough.
In fact, I don't know. I think maybe because they're young children, they're girls, and that photograph makes it especially powerful. But there were marches exactly like that in Forest Park. There's a great image, but they're all men holding a swastika flag, and it's identifiably in Forest Park. So I don't think we'll necessarily replace the image, but I'm going to send both of the images to you electronically. But please don't say that that image is from Forest Park or St. Louis or Missouri, even though in fact you can say that marches just like this did occur in Forest Park. You know, there's a bunch of other stuff, but I think I'm going to send it out to you by email. The only other thing I want to say before I introduce our guest speaker is I want to welcome the members of the still new Docent class. And if you'd stand briefly, I want people to get to recognize you. So I know they've been shadowing docents now. They're a wonderful, wonderful group. They're going to be a wonderful, great addition to the docent corps. So you will see them. They'll be showing up to shadow tours. Could be your tour. Please welcome them. They're really, really a wonderful group. As I say, everything else I'm going to send out by email. For those who have been celebrating, I hope you've had a wonderful holiday celebration. For those whose holiday lies ahead, I hope that will be a great celebration. And I hope the new year is going to be a wonderful, productive, prosperous, peaceful time for all of us. Having said that, it's my great honor to introduce today's speaker, Joan Silber, who spoke to us in 2013. Right? Yes, 2013. We're very happy that she is back. The Honorable Joan Silber, PhD, is a member of the U.S. Commission for the Preservation of America's Heritage Abroad. And I hope you will say a little bit more about that. She recently returned from her third project in Lithuania, representing the Commission. She will speak with us today about this summer's work in Kokiskas, where they sought to determine the exact grave site of Matilda Olkin, who was murdered during the Holocaust. Dr. Silber is just completing her service as board chair of Care and Counseling. She is the immediate past chair of the St. Louis American Jewish Committee, and now serves on the AJC National Board and Asia Pacific Institute Board. Dr. Silber also enjoys being on the boards of the St. Louis Jewish Light, the Newmark Institute, Webster University College of Arts and Sciences Advisory Board, and the Friends of the St. Louis Symphony. Her extensive worldwide travels, as well as her studies with Richard C. Olney and the practice of self-acceptance, have led her to an appreciation of the interconnection of all cultures and peoples. Dr. Silber teaches the practice of meditation in Gentle Breeze Studio, and something you can ask her about afterward, and lives in St. Louis with her husband, Dr. Sherman Silber. They have 3 sons, 1 daughter-in-law, and 8 grandchildren, more than you had in 2013. Congratulations. You can see Joan is a woman with a diverse and wonderful background, and I really want to thank and acknowledge her for all that she does to the St. Louis Jewish community and the St. Louis community overall. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. It's really my pleasure. Can you hear me okay? Anyone in the back that wants to sit closer? Don't hesitate.
Before you go further, sorry, The envelope is circulating, but it never got back here, so make sure it keeps going. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dan, for that kind introduction. I'm grateful to you and Jean, Lori, the staff here, and all of the docents who are here today for this opportunity to tell the story of Matilda Olkin. It's a story that's touched my heart and the hearts of the people of Lithuania, and I believe it will touch you today as well. It is just for those of us that are watching the clock, I should be finished long before 2 o'clock. So if you're concerned and getting antsy, you should just to know that there is an end. Now, this is an excerpt from one of Matilda's poems called My People. Do you hear? Do you hear that awful laughter? The hills, even the hills, will shake with it, and the rivers will faint, and the seas will faint, and the stone will cry. The stone will cry. You are laughing. You walk past and keep on walking. But for me, Lord, there are no words for my horror. That laughter, that awful laughter, and dark eyes flash with an undying, relentless pain. On July 10th, 1941, at the tender age of 19, Matilda Olkin was shot to death not far from her childhood home of Panamanelas, Lithuania, along with 4 members of her family and 4 of the Jofti family. They were thrown into a shallow pit, barely covered with soil. They were callously murdered because they were Jews. Too many lives, cut short by the horrors of the Holocaust, ended in such a heinous way. Yet this particular young woman has become an historic heroine among Lithuanian teenagers today. Groups of girls are reading her poetry, and they're making pilgrimages to visit a memorial monument near her gravesite. An award-winning play called The Silenced Muses has been written about her. Her poems and diary that were hidden for 70 years are now being translated for publication, and now the film about Matilda is nearing completion. She is indeed becoming known as the Anne Frank of Lithuania. In July of this past summer, as a sponsoring member of the United States Commission for the Preservation of America's Heritage Abroad, I traveled to the town of Kokishkis in the northeastern corner of Lithuania to join a team led by archaeologist, historian Dr. Richard Freund. Professor Freund is the director of the Maurice Greenberg Center for Judaic Studies at Hartford University. The team included geology professor Harry Joel of the University of Wisconsin-Eau St. Clair, cartologist and Professor Philip Reeder, of the Dean of the Bayer School of Natural and Environmental Sciences at Duquesne University, Dr. Susan Cardillo, Chair of Digital Media and Journalism at Hartford University, and a very keen group of university students who were training in the science of archaeology in the field. My contribution included video and still photography, and I hope a little friendship. In addition, freelance, this is just a reminder of the commission, sorry. In addition, freelance writer Matthew Scher joined us on assignment to write about Matilda. His article appeared in the recent November 2018 Smithsonian Magazine. The stated objective of our expedition was to use underground penetrating radar to locate the exact location and perimeter of the Olkin and Joffe families' gravesite. But the effective mission became much broader than that. First, in telling Matilda's story, we are keenly aware that she is one of the 3 million each with their own personal and significant story. Secondly, we honor the lives of these 9 people who were buried on the site. Thirdly, we try to understand the why such things happen, even knowing we may never find a satisfactory answer. Fourthly, we bring public attention to the history and significant contributions of the Jewish people in the Kokiškis vicinity of Lithuania. And lastly, and importantly, by telling Matilda's story, we are reminded to never forget. Never forget those who died, never forget their stories, never forget our shared Jewish culture that existed then and continues now. As each day in Kokiškis passed, I found myself contemplating that this girl, this family, would have enjoyed a full, prosperous life had they not been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Here is Matilda in 1936, happy, an honor student. Her father, Noah, a respected pharmacist in Kokiškis, where 50% of the townspeople were Jewish. There was this brief period of time between the 2 world wars when the Jews of the greater Kokiškis area still enjoyed a full cultural lifestyle. There were 4 shuls. Let's see if I can, just a minute, learn this. There we go. There were 4 shuls just a half a block away from the town square. 3 of them on a street called Synagogue Street. The mikveh was on a street called Bath Street. There was an active Yiddish theater and 3 Jewish day schools. And when we walk on the streets today, we're aware that half of the houses were Jewish homes. Jews and non-Jews were social friends and mixed freely. Even some of the paintings on the shutters reflect Jewish symbols like a menorah. Still, today it is common for each house in town to have its own garden. A Jewish bank thrived on the promenade that connected the large church with the restored, magnificent manor. And one can imagine the leisurely summer walks on a bridge that spanned over a lake filled with ducks and swans. Matilda grew up with dreams for her future. She left home to study at university in Vilnius and wrote in her diary about love and boys. She was happy and looking to a bright future. In an early poem, she wrote, "Oh, the sun has woken and leaps from bed. She opens one eye, then the other. Good morning. And all the flowers rejoice, all the flowers and the birds, they call out one after the other, good morning. But the sun shines most in the eyes of the little girl. Her eyes are bright, full of light. They greet her joyful world, a world bursting to life, filled with sunshine. Good morning, good morning." This is a photo of my oldest grandchild. Have to always get that in, right? Ada Lahama. This was taken this past summer. She was 19 years old, the age that Matilda was murdered for herself. She has a lot in common with Matilda. Artistic, curious, loves to write, and has a strong Jewish identity. Ada lives in Jerusalem with her 7 brothers and sisters. Both Adel and Matilda were born at a time when Judaism was practiced openly and freely. Adel lives in Israel at a time in history where the existence of the state may be under constant threat, but the citizens live in a democratic country that has the ability to defend itself. Matilda grew up in Lithuania at a horrific time in history. September 1, 1939, Germany began World War II by invading Poland, Lithuania's neighbor to the southwest. In 1940, the Soviet Union annexed Lithuania, confiscating many businesses in the midst of economic hardships. And so Matilda's poetry changed dramatically. In her diary, Matilda wrote of wanting to find a perfect marriage match and having children. But the tide of terrible events, however, prevented that from ever happening. In March of 1940, she wrote in her diary that's pictured here, her poem entitled A Jewish Lullaby. My tiny little baby, why can't you fall asleep? Longing overwhelms you tonight. Longing crouches beside your cradle. The nights are long and dark, and the road leads far into the distance. On such a night, you will leave me, my tiny little baby, and suffering will wait for you beside the gate like a beloved friend. Great suffering and hardship will carry you silently through long generations. Long generations carry suffering from the cradle to the grave. Suffering immense and deep, and as endless as the night. Fall asleep now. It is a long road that will lead you into the night. Go to sleep. I will sing to you, my tiny little baby. As the news of Germany's advances and cruelty advanced, and Lithuania was sandwiched between two warring and brutal countries, Germany and the Soviet Union, Matilda stopped making entries in her diary. She left university and returned home to be with her family in this struggling time for survival. Her poems inform us that the cloud of impending disaster hung over her head, and the previous romantic lyrics that spoke of flowers and rivers and sunshine were gone forever. This is all reflected in an untitled poem dated March 27, 1940. All the skiffs have floundered, and mine will sink as well. Death is wading through troubled waters, and death bade me sing my final hymn, and death bade me dance my final dance. And so I sing my hymn to the seagulls and the waves. The aquamarine heavens listen, and I sing to them too. And the sea carries my skiff through a window, carries me away to sleep, and will pull me under. Tonight, death wanders through restless waters. The sun has sunk already, and my skiff will too. Her father was a very close friend of Father Zappis Matilionis, who was the priest of what you've seen here, St. Joseph's Church in Panamanialis. Perhaps with a fear that Matilda's diary, as well as her notebook, would be found out somehow and Matilda might be harmed, Noah Olkin entrusted his daughter's writings to Father Matilionis. The kind and loyal friend had the diary with Matilda's well-worn notebook beneath and on the back side of his altar. Father Matilionis, a devout Catholic, who, by the way, had tea every Sunday afternoon with Noah Olkin, was later deported by the Soviets to Siberia, where he died. Just before he had to leave, he gave the diary and the notebook to his nephew, Alfredus Andrejaskas, a linguist and organist, who then turned around and entrusted them to his teacher in Vilnius. Dr. Gravesite, a Lithuanian intellectual Holocaust survivor who became a human rights activist. She is today still alive at the age of 90. Dr. Gravesite agreed to release copies of Matilda's poems and diary entries to another scholar writer, Laime Vince, to translate them. And as good as the translations are, as you just heard me read some of them, all the Lithuanians that we spoke with tell us that when they read Matilda's poems in Lithuanian, they are moved to tears. Laime Vince recently wrote in an article for a magazine in which she quotes a childhood classmate of Matilda's. And the classmate said, "Matilda was a pretty girl, with dark hair and dark eyes, but with milky white skin. She had a cheerful personality. Although she was Jewish, she spoke Lithuanian without any accent. In Kupiškis, we all knew that Matilda was a poet, and that impressed us deeply. We were very interested in her and her poetry. We all read her poems. Matilda's poetry, her thoughts, her work was all very Lithuanian. She was just like the rest of us Lithuanian children. She would write about our holidays. It made no difference to us that she was Jewish. Fast forward, and we learn that the Olkin family tragedy has been told from generation to generation in Kupiškis, and it was not pretty. There are those who knew the murderers personally, but said nothing. Serious thinking Lithuanians are now no longer under the control of totalitarian regimes that spin their truth to suit their warped ideologies. The scars are no longer so fresh, and the generation that was not there during the Holocaust and does not hold the personal guilt are now re-examining the role of Lithuanians during the Holocaust. And Matilda's emotional poetry awakens their heartstrings. Dramatist and Rokiškis resident Neringa Daniene became intrigued with Matilda's story. Neringa is a leader in the regional theater and arts of Rokiškis, and she is an actress and a playwright. Neringa was so moved by Matilda's poems that every time she read them, they brought her to tears. So by this tragedy that occurred in her own region years before, she determined to write a play. I had the honor of meeting with Neringa and was immediately touched with her honesty, her pursuit of truth, of representing history as it was, not as we might wish it to have been, and most of all with her sensitivity and her loving heart. In November of 2016, Neringa's play, The Silenced Muses, premiered in Rokiškis, and it played at various theaters around Lithuania to sold-out audiences, winning Lithuanian theatrical awards. I got my copy off the internet. And today, Matilda's poetry can be found in Lithuanian textbooks. She has indeed become the Anne Frank of Lithuania. This string of events that led to Matilda becoming a kind of heroine would not have happened if Noah Olkin and Father Matilda were not such intimate friends. Her writings would not have had the safekeeping under the church altar. And so I went with the team to the church to see the exact spot where Father Matilda hid Matilda's diary and notebook. The current priest of the church met us to allow us to take pictures of the church and the altar and the very location where Matilda's diary and notebook had been safely kept. Father Novikas is a very amiable man who seemed very touched by the dedication of Father Matilda to his Jewish friend and the role the church played in saving Matilda's words. While we were there, I wondered how it must have been for the non-Jewish townspeople who had such close relationships with their Jewish friends to so swiftly see half the population disappear under the Nazi rule and by the hand of their own Lithuanian collaborators. Here you see the front of the altar in St. Joseph Church. And here, behind the altar, on the back side, is now a hole that allows us to peer into the dark recesses where Matilda's diary was hidden. Now please, bear with me while I tell you what the townspeople know. The details that have been retold over the 70 years of what actually happened to the Olkin and Joki families, and soon thereafter to the entire Jewish community. The Soviet cruelty in Lithuania lasted 2 years. In June of 1941, the Russians arrested Jewish businessmen and professionals. Just hold on a second. In June of 1941, the Russians arrested Jewish businessmen and professionals and sent them by cattle cars to the death camps of Siberia. A few weeks later, the Soviets winter dryness. Anybody want something like that? A few weeks later, the Soviets retreated as the Germans invaded Lithuania. The Nazis enlisted local Lithuanians as allies, and those Lithuanian Nazi collaborators, called white armbanders, killed Matilda and her family. The ever-nagging question arose: how could these men who lived their lives as neighbors in a relatively small accomplish our mission? We estimated where the grave sites would be based on these stories from witnesses and from the location of a memorial monument for these two families that is erected by the side of the road. Since visiting the burial place of Matilda has now become a kind of pilgrimage site for young teenage girls, there is now a sign next to the road marking the location of the memorial. It just says Holocaust location, sorry. The monument itself is only a few steps away from the road. The engraving on the stone is in Lithuanian and in Hebrew. In Lithuanian it translates, "In this forest, 1941, the Olkin and Jaffe families were murdered." The Hebrew translates, "Here, in 1941, the family in the forest, to death, children, Jaffe, and the family of Olkin." Not exactly clear, and we are hoping it will be replaced with a more correctly traditionally Jewish inscription, and that a marker also will be placed at the site of the grave. Now you may be wondering, if not you will now, who erected this monument? And that is one of the many remarkable parts of Matilda's story. It was that theater group that performed the play about Matilda, the Silenced Muses, and performed it over and over. They wanted to do something more to commemorate this poetess who had become integrated into the very fiber of their own souls. Our job was to first find the burial site and then see if we could actually define the outline of the grave. Professors Freund, Joel, and Reeder paced a distance from that memorial stone to where they estimated the grave most likely might be, based on all of the different witness stories. But no one could be sure we were even in the correct location, as over 77 years the landscape itself had changed, and some of the descriptions of the location did not seem to match the current topography. The area they decided to check out first was full of trees and brush that needed to be cleared. The woods were full of ticks and horseflies, and everyone was full of bug repellent. For the clearing of the brush and trees, the students and 4 professors of our team were joined by local Lithuanian friends, historians, museum curators, and forestry personnel. Professor Freund here explains the challenge. Whoops, sorry. Here we go. Should start. Just learning this.
Do you need me to get it?
We might need some help on this. Okay, it's not starting.
We need a site that is 8 meters in. In order to get in, we have to clear the area so we can get in. And then the area has to be cleared so we can actually do the ground penetrating radar on the site. And there's our crew, I think.
Yes, why do some people think it's here? Because from the map we looked at, this does not look like the place.
Paskutinė liūdė, mums kaip pasakė, kad tą kelio pusė buvo sudžiūvę.
Yeah, there are two persons who kind of
to give evidence about these sites. One is already died lady, and one is still alive.
And then after that, the GPR, this is the ground penetrating radar equipment, was used to detect the difference in density in the earth. So the grave, which was looser dirt and would sink, would have a different density of soil than the surrounding land. At the same time, Dr. Reeder mapped the area being surveyed so that it could be reliably located at a future date. And the entire process took the better part of a day. So here we have Dr. Joel instructing the students on the use of the equipment. There we go. All this work we were doing, not knowing if we were for sure even in the right place, not knowing for sure that we would ever find Matilda. While the crew was working, I had an opportunity to ask freelance writer Matt Scher about his impressions in view of everything that he had learned.
Sitting in a bar and next to this Lithuanian guy and said, "What are you guys doing?" And I said, "We're looking for a mass grave." And he stopped and he said, "This entire country is a mass grave." I'm conflicted. My great-grandmother was from here, and her ancestors were killed, and it's sad. Just the weight of history is pretty oppressive in this country. People can identify with Matilda because she was because we have access to her inner thoughts in a way that we don't with a lot of Holocaust.
Because of the diary, specifically.
And the poems, yeah. What? Yeah. And that means a lot. Yeah, I think the big question for me with this is why and how, and I think that would be the heart of the story. The search for the remains is really important, and it's an important coda to the story, but I think the heart of the story is how something like this can happen. And if you can get as close as possible as figuring out how it happened, it's the same way one life stands for a lot of lost lives. If you can figure out how one person died, it says a lot about why a lot of people died in similar circumstances. Because this is, we're looking for her remains because she wrote beautifully. There are all sorts of people that die in exactly this fashion.
And then, standing in the field, we heard the exclamation, "We found it. It's here. We found Matilda." Later in the week, the team gathered around the memorial stone, and Rabbi Professor Freund led us in a Jewish prayer service for the Olkin and Jaffe families, and for all of those who were murdered during the Holocaust. Ms. Richard. There's me trying to find this.
It's obviously a life that was lived and cut short. So what I'd like to be able to do is listen to a few of her poems. First we'll listen to a poem in Lithuanian to hear the original voice of Matilda.
Mačiau tave šašą ir liūdėsi mačiau, ar tai tiesa pasaka, aš nieko nežinau. Matilda Olkinaitė.
Now we know that the poems of Matilda would have been just about your age when she was killed on this road. Her voice was something that spoke to Lithuanians and spoke to Jews. She wrote in a poetic Lithuanian that I think we can only understand as a Jewish Lithuanian voice. So, can we hear?
The nights are long and dark, and the road leads far into the distance.
The sun has sunk already, and my skip will too.
Then I saw their tears, and their sorrow I saw. Was it true, or was it a story? I don't know.
מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, כזוהר הרקיע מסירים גבם, ונאמר אמן.
Dieve, kuris esi pilnas gailestingumo ir kuris gyveni aukštybėse, ištarkime visi amen.
You know, we go out on these scientific missions every year, and we do try to maintain our scientific objectivity about what we're doing. But there's not a moment that I don't forget that it's not just science. And I want to just thank you for helping us discover and find Matilda. God who makes peace in the heavens, may He bring peace to us. As we remember this young Jewish poetess, Matilda Olkin, let us see her as a light to lead us to continue to work together to combat anti-Semitism, prejudice, hate, and inhumane brutality. Let us simultaneously work together to promote positive relationships at home and internationally, creating environments of understanding and peaceful resolutions. May knowing of the relationship between Noah Olkin and Father Matilda help us to understand the significance of true friendship. I thank you again, Dan, Jean, all of you here at the Holocaust Museum and in St. Louis, and for all that you do to support this very vital and relevant work that you do here. And I'd like to leave you with a condensed reading of a Matilda Olkin poem called A Word. I would like so much to utter one word. I carry that unspoken word in my heart. Just one word for the crowd and for the nations. Oh, the processions would pause. Time would come to a halt. All the generations would pause and they would listen. And my word would flutter above the mountains and the seas, above flowering rivers and rough waters, and longing and trembling suffering would cease, and the pain of the eon of shattered hopes. Thank you all for being here.
So, would you be willing to take some questions?
I'm happy to. I can't promise I have any answers. Yes, please.
Could you please clarify the timeline here? First off, it's not this, the murderers were all Lithuanians.
Correct.
They weren't Einsatzgruppen. They were practicing the procedures of the Einsatzgruppen.
Correct. They were. This was from what my understanding is, that the Nazis were doing this community after community. It was just their instructions, and they enlisted ethnic Lithuanians to do the work.
So
a lot of the work. I assume that they were doing some also, but it was basically that.
That's who enlisted. The Einsatzgruppen enlisted.
Right. The Nazis came in and said, we need people. Go dig graves. Go round up the Jews. Shoot them. Put them in the graves. Throw in some dirt. Go to the next group.
Sometimes it was the Einsatzgruppen themselves.
Sometimes also.
Okay,
right.
And this was like 1941?
1941, it was, all of this happened to the Olkin and Jaffe families in this particular region were like the first to be rounded up. 1941, I think it was in June, and then after that, they had already rounded all of the Jews from that particular little village that they lived in, and they were all taken somewhere, and they were all, the ones that were still there were murdered and so on.
And what, you mentioned also that the Soviets took Jews to
Siberia.
Yeah, when was that?
That would have, so the Soviets, the German, after the Germans conquered Poland, they started moving east. The Soviets were already there, and the Soviets were there for 2 years. So from 39 to 40, about 41, the Soviets were occupying Lithuania. And the Soviets, of course, were anti-religious, and so even the Catholic priest was taken. And they were rounding up some people and pulling them to Siberia in these cattle cars.
Was this before the Germans turned on the Soviets? Or they were still...
This was before the Germans, this was for the 2 years before Germany entered Lithuania.
So they were still living under the non-aggression pact, and therefore they were doing the Germans,
Yeah,
so to speak,
right. I mean,
we'll do our part and we'll take Jews, or we'll just take them to Siberia, as opposed to murdering them on the spot.
I don't know the answer to that. My understanding about this town is that the Soviets occupied there. They took over businesses. It was a Soviet communist sort of move, and then as the Germans came in, the Soviets left. So it wasn't like some other areas where they were collaborating on getting rid of people.
Then you have Stalin. So Stalin by then.
Yes.
Among the Lithuanian hosts,
yeah.
Did you hear any discussion or explanation of why it was that so many Lithuanians anxiously cooperated with the Nazis?
No. And though there were a couple of them that would have been open to that, but nobody really, the answers that, well, I shouldn't say entirely no. The answers that we got from those that you got to know very well and were comfortable with was that, there was, you go back through the more recent history, there was a serious, 1938, 1928, there was a serious economic downturn. So at the end of the 20th century, 75% of this particular town, and a lot of Lithuania were Jewish, 75%. But a lot of them left because of economic reasons. Businesses were going bad, it was worldwide problems, and so it was down to 50%. So it was a very bad economic time. The stories even about this family, the Olkin family, he was a pharmacist, but the Russians came in, they nationalized his pharmacy, they actually were going hungry, they couldn't afford to buy new pair of shoes, so it was a very difficult economic time, and so if there's any answer given, it's usually that.
In other words,
these were people who were getting paid or by the Nazis to do this work, and they had their families, and but they were also very rowdy. I mean, there's reports that after they did this, they were all drunk, and they were going to different houses and drinking vodka, and talking about what they had done. So these were not 60-year-old men.
What I was getting at was historic anti-Semitism. It must have been rampant in Lithuania, as it was in most.
Well, you know what, that is an interesting theory, and I'm sure that there were areas where this would rise up, but it was not the experience of any of these families, and anywhere we were in this area of Rakishkas, we were clearly seeing lots of evidence of friendships. They belonged to the same theater. It was pretty theater group, so I don't know. We talk about anti-Semitism, the terrible anti-Semitism going on out here, but I would say that they were much more integrated with the non-Jewish world there and friends. They had them, the father, Matryonis came to their home for Passover. I mean, it was a very integrated, the father and some other of the ethnic Lithuanians tried to persuade Matilda to come and let them hide her. She didn't want to leave her. So I didn't see that any more than you ever have in history anywhere else. I personally didn't perceive that, and I certainly don't perceive it now. It's different from Poland. Yes.
First of all, I want to congratulate you for the work and for the way you presented, because it's not just a passive presentation, you're just giving the facts. I think you represented St. Louis so well.
Thanks.
And secondly, I want to understand better about the commission that you were, this is a very special position that you were designated by our former president of the United States. But this is America's heritage abroad, so it's so interesting that, we're devoting resources, because this isn't necessarily America's heritage abroad. This was a separate incident, or how does it fit into
the commission work? The commission was established by an act of Congress after the Holocaust for mostly in response to the Jewish graves that had been desecrated, unattended, synagogues and so on, to restore those. The commission itself has just enough funding through the Defense Department to be able to pay for 1 or 2 assistants. The rest of us are all volunteers, and any project that any of us do, we have to either give or raise the funding. So it's not costing the taxpayers that much, and anything that we would restore or do, we have to have an agreement with the people of that town, and the State Department has to already have an agreement with the State Department of that country that it will be continued to be preserved. And the idea that it's America's heritage is that Americans have a history. So it's in this area. It's not restricted to Eastern Europe, but it is, even in the Act, designated that way. So we can do that. Does that explain it? Yes, please.
I just wanted to do, I think it's wonderful. I hope this will continue, because we from the Holocaust Museum 11 years ago went to Poland, and we were in many, many Jewish cemeteries, and the neglect was horrible. And it was just absolutely horrible. So I hope that slowly there's going to be some sort of upkeep.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know that not only the commission, but there are other groups that are doing that. But a number of our commission members have done some really incredible work, and it's online. It's of interest for you to see. And if anybody wants to give any money for a project, I know they're always welcome. Everybody else, hi, sweetheart.
As one of my students educated in adult life, I thank you for this, but I also am curious to bring the message to a wider audience. I know it's on the Smithsonian cover. I know there's a book you said we can get on Amazon. Do you think it would ever make it into something like New Jewish Theater or anywhere else?
Yes, I think it's being, so the play actually has now been translated. This is in English. And so there is the hope to maybe even bring it to Broadway, or possibly they could do something like that. So, and I'm sure that Naringa would be thrilled to do that. The theater, we met all of the cast at a big event at the Manor at the end, and they're all so touched that they would love to see this continue. So they're on it. But if anyone has a particular interest in that, I'd be happy to connect them to do something like that. Yes, please. Hi.
Yeah, well, I was very captivated by the poetry, and I just wondered, are there books of her poetry that are...
Yeah, the woman who, so this play was written by Naringa, but it was translated by Lana Vincent, who you saw the picture, the blonde, the lady with the blonde hair. And she is translating a lot of those poems. Most of it's still in Lithuanian, but she's planning to publish that. And it's a question, we heard a lot of conversation about who has the rights to this and who has the rights to that. And the elderly woman who actually has the possession of the book, does she have the rights? So it's getting into all that stuff. But eventually, and actually I think fairly soon, we'll see that being translated into English and published. And this is actually very short and readable and excellent. It's this in itself. So the play is here. It's just a matter of getting the rights. If New Jewish Theater or anybody wanted to produce it, they would just need to get hold of them for the rights.
I don't want to, somebody else has a question on that. When you say that they found the remains?
Found the graves.
Oh, the graves.
Because the ground penetrating radar, that's one of the advantages. You do not have to invade the grave. We can identify where it is and its exact perimeter without it. And Richard and Harry Joel and Bill Reeder are kind of like a team, and they've been doing this all over Lithuania. And there's a Nova production out on it. Richard is coming, I believe you mentioned that, Dan. He'll be here speaking to this group in February.
We're working on that, but some of you may remember that he was here some years ago discussing the archaeological scientific work he did at Sobibor. Now he's been working on the 9th fort in Lithuania, and he will be here in February, and we're working on scheduling something.
Okay, well, he already sent me an email telling me the date. I mean,
well, he's definitely doing a program at Base Abraham Synagogue.
Right.
But he's offered to do a second thing.
Right, and I think it's on this film that is The Good Nazi that is now in previews or is coming out around that time.
It'll be out in the fall. So this would be a preview. So.
And he is terrific, and his wife is a St. Louisan, so.
So but my question would be that, no, so the plan wasn't, maybe I misunderstood, the plan wasn't to, whatever the remains were, to unearth them and give them a proper burial or something. No, the plan was just to find it and maybe
right, I mean, we're talking 77 years later.
No, exactly.
Digging
So
up
nothing,
people's bones.
but exactly, so there was nothing, nothing open.
No, and we had several other projects that we did at the same time. We went to another site where we had heard that they were as a mass grave, and called Shakas, not too far away, and they identified that mass grave, and so the end of it isn't to pull the bodies out or uncover them, but to leave them at rest and give them proper marking so that the grave is marked.
So just that, okay.
And protected.
Did any of those who were sent to Siberia, like a priest, survive to give any?
I don't know. I just know the priest did not. I don't know. I mean, I presume it's just like anyone else who was sent to the Siberian camps. Most of them. It's terrible.
And you know what more letters after Olkin?
Olkinite. That's like a more formal. It's a more formal way of saying their name, but most of the people are using Olkin when they refer to it. Yes, please. Hi.
Hi, Joni. I read the Smithsonian article, not knowing you were involved, and it's an excellent article, so I would highly recommend reading the article, certainly now as a follow-up to...
There's a couple of articles in here around the same subject, and thank you for mentioning it. And Matthew just did a beautiful job of writing this, sensitive and accurate, and with a lot of interviews that he had done.
He seemed very touched.
Oh, he was. He was very genuine. Yes.
Are you familiar with the French priest whose name escapes me? There's a documentary on Netflix about him who does this, finds these graves.
Oh, yes, I know of him. I don't know him personally. Yeah, and he has a little different approach to it. We have a member of the commission who is who has funding locating in Eastern Europe a lot of these mass grave sites by sending a team. He sends a team of a couple of people out to the rural areas, and they get comfortable with the locals, and they start asking them questions, and they find that everybody knows everything. There's no secret where these happen.
Holocaust of Matilda Olkin. I can't remember if it's Dubois.
Father Dubois.
Dubois.
Oh, Dubois is the priest, you're right.
And
right.
The Holocaust of Matilda Olkin is a fascinating book, just for even forensics.
So I think I don't want to misspeak, but I believe that he's locating them, but not necessarily arranging for their continued oversight. So, but it's all important work, it's different kind of work. Thank you for bringing that up. One more, yes?
You touched on this before, but I just want to make sure. There was no feeling that any of the locals felt any kind of sense of hostility that something was being discovered or revisited from a generation or 2 generations ago in terms of their families or anyone else? It was all a sense of friendliness?
I mean, we met with, it's in Matt's article, I mean, I couldn't present everything, but we met with a very talented wood carver, non-Jewish, who did these fabulous, wood carvings out of whole log trees and totems and stuff. And he did a totem dedicated to Matilda, and it's there in the town of Kokishkas. You talk to anybody we talk to, there's nothing but recollections of friendships. So I can't tell you that in their heart of hearts there wasn't something, but history takes strange turns. No, I mean, I'd love to be able to pin it on it, but I didn't, maybe, I didn't see it, I didn't hear it in any way.
Is the Smithsonian article online that I could send it to everyone?
Matt has an article online that is on the same subject. We're published in October online. There's a little bit different content.
Okay.
And we can get, I don't know, you'd have to just contact the Smithsonian, see if there's reprints or something. I tried, I didn't get it online.
It's there.
Okay, it is online?
Yeah, I found it.
Did you find it?
Yeah.
Great, so I'll email it to
This
everyone.
is the November article, not the October.
The whole issue.
Pardon?
The whole issue.
Oh, the whole issue is online, so there you go. Thank you. Next time I have to do this, I'll ask you, call you.
Thank you again.
Thank you all.
Docent, if you didn't check your name up on the attendance on the counter